Welcome to lesson 19.1, the fossil record. In this lesson, we'll explain what information fossils can reveal about ancient life. We'll explain how we date events in Earth's history. We'll describe how the geologic timescale was established and give its major divisions, and describe how Earth's physical and biological environments shaped the history of life. Fossils provide vital information about extinct organisms. Fossils form rarely, and they only form under certain conditions. For every organism preserved as a fossil, many more died without leaving a trace, so the fossil record is not complete. Still, the fossil record contains an enormous amount of information for paleontologists. Fossils can be as large and perfectly preserved as an entire animal, complete with skin, hair, scales, or feathers, and sometimes even internal organs. They can also be as tiny as bacteria, developing embryos, or pollen grains. Many fossils are just fragments of an organism, teeth, piece of a jawbone, or bits of leaf. Sometimes an organism leaves only trace fossils, casts of footprints, burrows, tracks, or even droppings. Although most fossils are preserved in sedimentary rocks, some are preserved in other ways, such as in amber. Most fossils are preserved in sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock usually forms when small particles of sand, silt, clay, or lime muds settle to the bottom of a river, lake, ocean, or other body of water. Sedimentary rock can also form from compacted desert sands. As sediments build up, they bury dead organisms that have sunk to the bottom. If these remains are buried quickly, they may not be scattered by scavengers. Soft body structures usually decay quickly after death, so only wood, shells, bones, or teeth remain. These hard structures can be preserved if they are saturated or replaced with mineral compounds. Sometimes, however, organisms are buried so quickly that soft tissues are protected from aerobic decay. When this happens, fossils may preserve incredibly detailed imprints of soft-bodied animals and structures like skin or feathers. As layers of sediment build up over time, the remains are buried deeper and deeper. Over many years, pressure gradually compresses the lower layers. This pressure, along with chemical activity, can turn the sediments into rock. So which body structures are most likely to become fossils, and why? Hard structures, such as shells, bones, or teeth, because hard structures are less susceptible to decay than soft tissues are. So what turns the layers of sediments into rock? It's the pressure and chemical activity that turn the sediments to rock. What part of these animals have been preserved as a fossil? The bones. So what can paleontologists infer from fossils? They could infer how body structures or species evolved and what an ancient ecosystem was like. By comparing fossils to one another and to living organisms, paleontologists can propose and test evolutionary hypotheses. Comparisons of body structures test hypotheses about the appearance, evolution, and sequential nature of groups in the fossil record. Studies of evolutionary change in body structures can also test hypotheses about the evolution of living species from extinct common ancestors and the evolution of diversity among species. Bone structures and footprints can indicate how animals moved. Fossilized plant leaves and pollen suggest whether an area was a swamp, a lake, a forest, or a desert. Also, when different kinds of fossils are found together, researchers can sometimes reconstruct entire ancient ecosystems. Fossils reveal information about the structures of ancient organisms, the sequential nature of groups in the fossil record, the evolution from common ancestors, and the ecology of ancient environments. Look closely at the fossil bat at the top right. What can you infer about how the organism moved? Well, the fossil appears to be a vertebrate, has a tail, and has forelimbs longer and sturdier than its hind limbs. It probably depended on its forelimbs to move about, possibly by flying. Use the fossil in the bottom photograph to describe an ichthyosaur. Well, you could say it had flipper-like appendages, a tail, and a pointed beak. Everything scientists know about the organisms here have been derived from studying their fossils. Predict what a fossil might reveal about an organism. It could reveal its size, its structure, its environment, maybe even what it ate. What does the presence of fossils of large marine reptiles in places like Kansas and South Dakota suggest about the environment in ancient times? It could suggest that these areas were underwater at some time. The fossil record wouldn't be as useful without a time scale to tell us what happened when. Researchers use several techniques to date rocks and fossils. Because sedimentary rocks is formed as layers of sediment are laid on top of existing sediments, lower layers of sedimentary rock and the fossils they contain are generally older than upper layers. Relative dating places rock layers and their fossils in a temporal sequence. Relative dating allows paleontologists to determine whether a fossil is older or younger than other fossils. To help establish the relative ages of rock layers and their fossils, scientists use index fossils. Index fossils are distinctive fossils used to establish and compare the relative ages of rock layers and the fossils they contain. A useful index fossil must be easily recognized and will occur only in a few rock layers, meaning the organism lived only for a short time. But these layers will be found in many places, meaning that the organism was widely distributed. Trilobites, a large group of distinctive marine organisms, are often used as index fossils. There are more than 15,000 recognized species of trilobite. Together, they can be used to establish the relative dates of rock layers spanning nearly 300 million years. Take a look at this diagram. Which index fossil is found in all three locations? That would be fossil D. Using the index fossils shown, determine which layers are missing from each location. Well, in location 1, the layer with index fossil E is missing. Location 2 is missing the layers with index fossils B and E and F. Location 3 is missing the layers with index fossils A and C. Layers may be missing because they were never formed or because they were eroded. Relative dating is important, but it provides no information about a fossil's absolute age in years. One way to date rocks and fossils is radiometric dating. Radiometric dating relies on radioactive isotopes which decay or break down into stable isotopes at a steady rate. A half-life is the time required for half of the radioactive atoms in a sample to decay. Radiometric dating uses the proportion of radioactive to stable isotopes to calculate the age of a sample. Take a look at this graph showing the radioactive decay of potassium-40. According to the chart, what is the half-life of potassium-40? It's around 1.25 billion years. So how much potassium-40 should be left in 2.5 years, or approximately 2 half-lives? Well, that's a half times a half, which would be about 1/4. If a fossil has 1/8 the amount of potassium-40, approximately how old is it? It's about 3.75 years old. Different radioactive isotopes decay at different rates, so they have different half-lives. Elements with short half-lives are used to date recent fossils. Elements with long half-lives are used to date older fossils. An isotope known as carbon-14 is useful for directly dating fairly recent fossils. Carbon-14 is produced at a steady rate in the upper atmosphere, so air generally contains a tiny amount of it in addition to the much more common stable, non-reactive form, carbon-12. Plants take carbon-14 in when they absorb carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, and animals acquire it when they eat plants or other animals. Once an organism dies, it no longer takes in this isotope, so its age can be determined by the amount of carbon-14 remaining in tissues such as bone, hair, or wood. Carbon-14 has a half-life of roughly 5,730 years, so it can only be used to date organisms that lived during the last 60,000 years. Older fossils can be dated indirectly by dating the rock layers in which they are found. Isotopes with much longer half-lives are used for this purpose, including potassium-40, which has a half-life of around 1.25 billion years, uranium-238, which has a 4.5 billion year half-life, and rubidium-87, which has a 48.8 billion year half-life. Geologists use these and other isotope methods to make increasingly accurate estimates of the ages of geologic formations. These studies provide direct physical evidence for the ages of index fossils that identify periods of Earth's history. These data, in turn, provide information used to document the sequential nature of groups in the fossil record and the rates at which groups appear, evolve, and become extinct. So why can't carbon-14 be used to estimate the age of very old fossils? Carbon-14 has a relatively short half-life of 5,730 years. After about 60,000 years, so little carbon-14 remains in fossils that it cannot be used to accurately assess the age of the fossils. By studying rock layers in index fossils, early paleontologists placed Earth's rocks and fossils in order according to their relative age. As they worked, they noticed major changes in the fossil record at boundaries between certain rock layers. Geologists used these boundaries to determine where one division of geologic time ended and the next began. Years later, radiometric dating techniques were used to assign specific ages to the various rock layers. This timescale is constantly being tested, verified, and adjusted. Eons are the longest timescale. Eons are divided into eras. Eras are subdivided into periods, which range in length from nearly 100 million years to just under 2 million years. The Paleozoic era, for example, is divided into 6 periods, including the Permian period. So what era are we currently in? We are currently in the Cenozoic era. What are the periods of the Mesozoic era, from oldest to most recent? They are the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. When did the Cretaceous period end? It ended about 65.5 million years ago. Geologists now recognize 4 eons. The Hadean eon, during which the first rocks formed, spans the time from Earth's formation to about 4 billion years ago. The Archean eon, during which life first appeared, followed the Hadean. The Proterozoic eon began 2.5 billion years ago and lasted until 542 million years ago. The Phanerozoic eon began at the end of the Proterozoic and continues to the present. So what is the name of this oldest time interval on the scale? That's the Precambrian time. Divisions of the geologic timescale were named in different ways. The Cambrian period, for example, was named after Cambria, an old name for Wales, where rocks from that time were first identified. The Carboniferous, meaning carbon-bearing period, is named for large coal deposits that formed during that time. Geologists started to name divisions of the timescale before any rocks older than the Cambrian period had been identified. For this reason, all of geologic time before the Cambrian was simply called Precambrian time. Precambrian time, however, actually covers about 90% of Earth's history. It can be hard to think in terms of billions or even millions of years. To help visualize the enormous span of time since Earth formed, a clock can be used to compress the history of Earth into a 24-hour period. How does this clock differ from most clocks in everyday use? Well, a regular clock shows 12 hours. This clock shows 24 hours. Regular clocks do not include the geological time scale. How does the clock model geologic time? It compares the length of geologic time to a 24-hour day. So according to this comparison, out of a 24-hour day, how long is Precambrian time? It would represent 21 of the 24 hours. During the course of a human lifetime, environments can be seen constant. The Gulf of Mexico is usually hot and humid. Antarctica is usually cold. But Earth's physical environment and climate have changed over time, and those changes dramatically affected the history of life. Regional climates have changed repeatedly over millions of years. Many changes were triggered by fairly small shifts in global temperature. For example, during a global heat wave of the Mesozoic era, average global temperatures were only 6 degrees Celsius to 12 degrees Celsius higher than they were in the 20th century. During the Great Ice Ages, which chilled the globes as recently as 10,000 years ago, temperatures were only about 5 degrees centigrade cooler than they are now. Some of these regional and global environmental changes occurred as geological forces built mountains, moved continents, and created island chains like the Galapagos and Hawaiian Islands. Continental drift produced even more dramatic changes in Earth's landscape. At the end of the Permian period, Earth's continents collided to form one giant landmass called Pangaea. During the Triassic period, Pangaea started to break apart and form separate landmasses. By the end of the Cretaceous period, the continents as we know them began to drift apart. This is all the result of solid plates moving as little as 3 centimeters a year over Earth's mantle. How do you think the climate of South America changed as that continent moved? It became warmer. What effect do you think the climate change would have had on the plants and animals in South America over time? Organisms with adaptations enabling them to survive in the changed climate would have become predominant. Local and regional climates are influenced by interactions between wind and ocean currents and geological features such as mountains and plains. Mountain building, the emergence of islands, continental drift, changes in levels of continents and oceans, and global climate change have altered Earth's habitats with major effects on the history of life. Changes in external factors alter ecological interactions among organisms and between organisms and their environments. Changed interactions change the pressures of natural selection, favoring adaptation to new conditions. The emergence of new habitats and changes in the environment of existing habitats both create new ecological niches. New niches offer opportunities for natural selection to increase diversity among species. Continental drift also shaped the biogeography or distribution of fossils and living organisms. The continents of Africa and South America are now separated by the Atlantic Ocean, but fossils of Mesosaurus, an aquatic reptile, have been found in Africa and South America. The presence of the same fossils on both continents reflect the fact that they were joined at one time. There is also strong evidence that comets and large meteors have crashed into Earth many times in the past. Some of these impacts may have been so violent that they kicked enough dust and debris into the atmosphere to cause or contribute to major extinctions on the land and in the water. Life definitely reacts to changes in Earth's physical environment, but life also plays a major role in shaping that environment. Today, plants, animals, and microorganisms are active players in global cycles of key elements, including carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. Earth's early atmosphere contained much more carbon dioxide than it does today, and no oxygen. Then, early photosynthetic organisms began absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. Our planet has never been the same. Earth cooled as carbon dioxide levels dropped. The iron content of the oceans fell as soluble iron ions reacted with oxygen to form insoluble compounds, rust, that settled to the ocean floor. These changes affected climate and ocean chemistry in many ways. The actions of living organisms over time have changed conditions in the atmosphere, the oceans, and the land. Those changes altered the pressures of natural selection in ways that favored the evolution of different adaptations, new organisms, and new groups of organisms. The presence of oxygen, for example, led to the evolution of aerobic metabolism, transforming life on Earth.